Hey everybody, I'm so sorry. I had to take care of some things before I started this video. I banged my knee and it was so painful. Like, you really don't understand. Oh, wait a second. You guys thought that I was... Really? That's so sad. Okay? You have a dirty mind. You guys really need Jesus, okay? No pun intended. but you know, I really wanted to do a social experiment, if you will, with this, because, you know, the Kundalini is something that is a sexual nature, okay? It corresponds to our sexual nature. And it actually, it gets transmuted, actually, okay, into knowledge eventually as it ascends up the spine, up to the Godhead, okay? But it actually starts off at the base, okay, of your spine, where your root chakra is. And this is where your sexual organs are. Your sexual organs are where your solar plexus is and your root chakra. For women, you know, our sexual organs are, you know, where a womb is, okay? Where we create life, where our babies, where we have our babies, where we carry our babies. And you know, one thing about the New Age, you know, it doesn't really give you a lot of information about why the Kundalini is really associated so much with sex, okay? It doesn't tell you why it's associated with sex. So I really want to kind of shed light on this and the sexual aspect of it, okay? Now, when you are experiencing Kundalini Rising, there's a certain level of sexual perversion that goes along with it, right? Because the thing is that when your solar plexus has been restricted, your solar plexus represents your will, okay? This is your desire, what you want to do. And you can't do what you want to do in the matrix. In the matrix, you know, you have to adhere to certain, you know, conform to certain, like, laws, right? You can't break the law. If you break the law, you go to jail. If you don't adhere to certain social norms and things like that, then, you know, you're shunned and you're ostracized by society. And so this is restricting your will, okay, which is tied to your solar plexus, your soul, or, you know, solar means sun. So this is really the Son of God. This is why oftentimes you see depictions of Jesus with his heart in chains. And so when I was panting, and, you know, you guys, you know, sickly assumed, right, because you all have dirty minds, right? So you assumed that I, you know, that I was being pleasured, right? Or pleasuring myself. But I wanted to see what your reaction would be internally, okay? You know, ask yourself, were you judging me? You know, were you saying, oh, she's so nasty and disgusting? Or were you saying, did it make you feel uncomfortable in some type of way? Because we're always taught, sex is a topic that's very taboo in the matrix. And we're taught to deny our sexual nature or put it in the dark. It's something that's done behind closed doors. And so anything that's in a dark place is debased, okay? It's debased. And so when you heard me panting and so forth, if your reaction was judgmental or if your reaction was uncomfortable, this is an indication that your Kundalini is in a debased state. Okay, your solar plexus, your root chakra is in a debased state. Now, if you were just kind of like shocked by it and you were like, oh, this is funny as hell, then I don't really think, I think that your solar plexus or your root chakra are not as polarized, okay? It's more balanced. But if you really had a reaction to what I was doing, then there's something in your unconscious that's triggering that reaction. So this is like basic psychology, whatever the case is, okay? The thing is that we have two selves, okay? We have two selves. Okay? We have what we call an ego and an astral self. So your astral self is what you go to sleep to, okay? So as an ego, you have a restriction. You know, there's only certain things that you can do, what have you. But when you go to sleep at night, who are you? Do you remember who you are? You don't really, okay? You are not, you know, yourself. You don't have a name, right? You don't have, you know, a nationality, right? Or a country. You don't have a religion. These are aspects of you that you have when you're in a body, when you're an ego. When you go to sleep at night, you escape to the astral realm. And so the astral realm is really where your unconscious lies, okay? So I want you to keep that in mind as we're talking about Kundalini and Kundalini Rising, all right? There was an experiment that was done one time where there were some men put into two categories. And one of the categories were men who were extremely homophobic, okay? They were extremely homophobic, and they, you know, they just hated, you know, gay men. They hated gay people. And then there was a group of men that were in a category where they were just like, you know, they don't really care. It's like, you know, one way or the other. They weren't very judgmental, okay? They're like, if you're gay, it doesn't matter. I feel confident in myself, so I don't care about you being around. But what they did was an experiment. The people who conducted the experiment had these men watch gay porn, okay? And so they measured the erections of both, you know, I guess, you know, groups of men. And the group that had the strongest erections were the men who were homophobic. They had the strongest erections. So this goes to show that, and I'm not saying that being gay is perverted or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't judge. But what I'm trying to get you to see is that whatever you are judging harshly is a part of you. Okay, so this experiment really shows that, the unconscious. You know, whatever we loathe in the physical is a part of us in the metaphysical, okay, in the mind, in the astral, in the subconscious, okay? So I want you to keep that in mind. And so when it comes to Kundalini rising, when the Kundalini starts to rise from the root chakra, we really get in touch with these, I guess you would call sexual aspects of us that were suppressed due to the imbalance of the root chakra and the sacral chakra, okay? So let me just kind of put that out there. So this is where your unconscious lies. So for me, I was abused when I was younger, and being abused really messes up your roots. It messes up your root chakra. So, you know, when you're, the root chakra represents your grounding, right? Being stable, your stability, being grounded to the earth. And so when, you know, and your stability, so when you are abused when you're a child, right? You're helpless, you're an invalid, right? You don't really have good motor skills, or you don't really have the motor skills to defend yourself. You don't have the verbal skills to tell someone what's going on with you. You know, you don't have the capabilities of even telling someone to stop, right? So when I was younger, actually, my abuse, I can only remember it back, around the age of 4. But from what I heard from what I was told from a family member, my abuse was taking place while I was in the crib as a baby. So I was being molested as a baby, okay? And so the thing is that the only way for a baby or a small child to deal with abuse is to check out, is to dissociate. So whatever is happening to you, because you can't go to your caregivers, your earthly masters like your parents or whomever, your babysitter, whatever, the people who are supposed to take care of you, the people who are victimizing you. And so you feel powerless, right? And so you don't have any stability, you don't have any security. So the root chakra is debased, okay? So where the Kundalini starts to rise is off kilter. It's not a healthy chakra. And when you think about consciousness, you should think of it as like a house, okay? You have to have a strong foundation. If you don't have a strong foundation to your house, what happens to it? It falls down, right? It's not going to resist weathering and and so forth. And so life is weathering, right? You go through life and some things are impact your life negatively, but if you have strong roots, then you're able to weather those things. You always have your roots, your family unit to fall back on. And so when you don't have a strong family unit to fall back on, then that causes you to make decisions based upon survival. And to make unconscious decisions that if you had a strong root, you would not have made that particular decision, okay? So this is where your genitals are housed, right? And so this is where the sexual perversion kind of starts and takes place with the imbalance of that root chakra. Now, the Kundalini goes from your root chakra, right? And it goes up and it's ascending up to your solar plexus. And your solar plexus represents your will and your creativity. So this is the womb where, women create life, right? And the solar plexus also, represents, what you want to do, right? Like I said, it's associated with Jesus, the Son of God. Solar means sun. So when you're being abused, right? Or if you're in a powerless situation, especially in your earlier years, all right? Your will is restricted, and for me, my will was very severely restricted, my first date was my senior prom, really. And so, I lived a very strict life, it was very, very restricted. And so the thing is that when you're doing this to consciousness, you are perverting the soul, the solar plexus. You're perverting the sexual nature. And really, to be honest with you, with COVID-19 and what's going on now, definitely is perverting the sexual nature, okay? And some people are just like, what are you talking about? Like, I've never even heard of the solar plexus and so forth, but sex is not what we think it is, okay? I used to think, oh, sex is, just for procreation and for enjoyment and so forth, and it is for those things, but when it comes to the significance of sex and how it correlates to us as a human being, there's much more to it than what we think we know about it in the matrix, okay? So there's an occult aspect to sex. And so, when your solar plexus is being debased, right? And so just like with the quarantine, all the restrictions that we have on us, in terms of having to wear masks and, having to, adhere to different times when, places are closed, you can't go where you want to go, when you want to go, and so forth, like you typically have more leeway and leisure to do so. It creates a restriction in the soul, in the solar plexus. So this is Rome, and the solar plexus represents Jesus, okay? The Son, your Son of God. So Rome is trying to, quote unquote, kill the Son, okay? They're trying to bring the sun to judgment, all right? And this kind of goes into Whore of Babylon symbology, right? I've never really heard spiritual teachers talk about the symbolic occult meaning of the Whore of Babylon. But everybody in the Matrix is a whore. And I know you're going to be like, okay, you are crazy. I understand, but bear with me, okay? You know, if you're living in the Matrix, especially now during COVID-19 and the quarantine, your solar plexus is being restricted. And since that's where your sexual organs are located, that particular energy system around your sexual organs is being restricted, okay? And this creates perversion. Now, it may not be a conscious perversion, but it is a perversion. Like I said, you have two selves. You have the conscious and the unconscious. Going back to the social experiment that I had at the beginning, where I talked to you about, you know, the men with the homophobia who had the strongest erections. So, the thing is that when your Kundalini starts to rise, a lot of the sexual filth that was unconscious is brought to the forefront. A good video to actually, you know, showcase this is Florence and the Machine's song. Is called "What Kind of Man Loves Like This," okay? In this video, you see, and first of all, the Florence and the Machines, if you've ever heard about that, what is it, that band. Florence is an occultist. Like, I can take any Florence and the Machine song that you give me, and it has an esoteric meaning behind it. So she's an occultist, okay? So if you want to get into the occult, definitely listen to Florence and the Machines. Everything is symbolic, really. I haven't heard anything that has not been. But in this video for What Kind of Man Loves Like This, she represents the Whore of Babylon, okay? We see her in the video where she's being betrayed by Judas, all right, which is her male counterpart. And he's not really telling her, you know, what's going on. Like, she's like trying to figure out what's going on between her and this man, right? Which is a representation of her. But she doesn't really know what's going on. She's just speculating. She's just like, you know, there's a storm and you and I are in the middle of it and it's calm, but there's a lot of chaos that's around us. And he's not saying anything to her. And then in the video, we see her Kundalini start to rise, and she's in the midst of all these men and having sex with all of these men. And you see her in a dungeon with a mattress, and she's, you know, having sex with all these men and praising them. Like, she's like praising the men. So it's like, you know, in a way symbolically like praising Satan or praising, what is it? The material, right? Praising, you know, being totally just dominated by, you know, sexuality and so forth, and having an imbalance in her sexual nature. So really it just symbolizes her being super duper feminine and not being in tune, having a balanced masculine counterpart, okay? So she's receiving a severe restriction that causes all of these devils, if you will, to jump out as her Kundalini rises. And so you see at the end of the video that she gets baptized, okay? She gets baptized in order for these the Kundalini to, you know, I guess be stabilized, her masculinity to be, you know, stabilized, and you know, where she's not I guess, you know, copulating with all these men. And you can see that she's conflicted within herself, because, you know, it's like she doesn't want to be, you know what I mean? Like, she doesn't want to embrace that masculine aspect of herself, but it's kind of like she can't help it. You know, she can't help it. It's something that's beyond her. That's beyond her conscious control. And you see in the video how she's trying to get back with her male counterpart, but, you know, it's being torn apart by the Kundalini. Okay? And so the Kundalini really is like, you know, in the Bible, where it talks about that old serpent, right? So the serpent is the Kundalini, all right? Is what the Bible is referring to as the devil. And, when my Kundalini started to rise, and I met these perverted sexual aspects, I said to myself, okay, this is very strange, because as an ego, I'm not a very sexual person at all, I've been taught to be more sexually prudent. Like I said, my first date was my senior prom. I was always shunned from, talking about boys or thinking about boys or, talking on the phone with boys when I was younger, even in high school, what I mean? It was kind of like, if you look at a boy the wrong way, then you're a whore. Like I remember, what is it? I was in middle school, actually. I remember a distinct, memory where, I was graduating, and so I hugged one of my friends, who was a boy. And I was like, oh, he's my friend. I really like him. And, it was graduation day, and I thought that, it was appropriate or what have you. But my mother called me a whore. My mother called me a whore for doing it. And she was like, you're a whore and whatever the case is. And I remember I really broke down that day. And it was kind of like, okay, this is strange. This is not normal for, something that's just a gesture, just a small gesture. It's not like I kissed the boy or, felt him up or he felt me up or something like that. It was just a hug. And to be ostracized and to be treated as if I was a whore was disgusting. In hindsight, I see that it was like really disgusting how I was treated. And, there's different, incidences like this throughout my life that I realized that my sexual nature, I was made to think of my sexual nature in a very negative way, okay? And so this causes you to become more psychological and not to embrace the sexual nature. And so whenever you're suppressing your sexual nature, you're causing yourself to be very imbalanced in your unconscious when it comes to sex, okay? So the more psychological you are, the more perverted you are on the astral realm and the subconscious when it comes to sex. And when you experience Kundalini rising, that starts to come out. And it comes out in a very judgmental way because you don't identify with it as an ego. As an ego, I was just, taught just to, keep your legs closed. If you're not married or you're not in a very committed relationship, you keep your legs closed. If you don't do that and you don't look at sex as something very sacred, then you're a whore. And so nobody's going to want to be with you, and no one respects whores and so forth. And so, you be a good girl, like type of thing. And so, I never really knew how to even act around men, and so this left me very susceptible to be taken advantage of, in lots of ways, in a way where I made decisions that I was like, oh, like I may have, been a little bit more, I don't know, I wouldn't say promiscuous, but, been a little bit more carefree, right? Than being so limited to who, I dated and, marrying a man eventually that, was not for me. Otherwise, if I had had more, I guess you would say, consciousness involving my sexuality, then I would have made, better decisions in life that really affected me in great ways. And, it's very unfortunate that, my sexual nature was suppressed so horribly. Okay, and so this goes back to Whore of Babylon symbology, where the soul, the solar plexus, Jesus, your son of God, is very suppressed. So you become a whore in the unconscious. So in the astral realm, you're really getting it in, like as an ego, you're like more pious and more psychological and judgmental in terms of how you express yourself sexually. And so that subjugation has to be released, okay? And so, like I said, you get in touch with this when you are experiencing Kundalini rising. And, it got to the point where it was annoying. Like, I had a dirty mind. I said to myself, okay, this is strange, because it was difficult for me to even, do, normal things without thinking about sex as my Kundalini started to rise. it gets transmuted into knowledge eventually, but it has to go to that root chakra, the solar plexus, and those parts of you that are severely debased, especially if you've experienced a lot of abuse as a child. And you know, I would try different things like castaberry, like a lot of Buddhist monks, they use castaberry and certain things to subjugate the sexual nature. And you know, at that time when I was talking to my mom, I was like, hey, you know, Mom, you know, my libido is up really high. You know what I mean? And so I was looking to her even like, hey, you know, because I never really talked to my mom about things like that, but I felt that she and I was having a better relationship. And so I said to myself, well, you know, maybe she can help me, you know, to figure out what to do to make this better. And, you know, it never, you know, well, it got better eventually, but you know, I couldn't find solace in her or anyone. There was no one really in the New Age or videos and things like that that I watched about the Kundalini that really talked to you and taught you about really what happens when Kundalini starts to rise. So I think that Florence and the Machines, that song, What Kind of Man Loves Like This, really puts a more accurate representation of the hell that you go through, because you know, my root chakra, my sacral chakra, was in a state of hell. And so just like her in that video, she was going through hell. Okay. And that's being made even more, you know, known, or even more I guess as you would say pronounced with this quarantine and the solar plexus being restricted. But my state of consciousness is beyond that now. My state of consciousness is more, I guess that you would say, in the etheric realm, which is the selfless realm, because your root chakra, your solar plexus, is more in your selfish or your narcissistic or your egoic aspect of yourself. So I've gone beyond that. And once you get beyond that, you acquire knowledge, okay? But the thing is that those unconscious aspects of you when it comes to sexuality are still there, okay? They're still there if they're not expressed. And so, like, people tend to think that saints, right? Because Rome loves saints. You know, saints are wonderful. But saints are actually filthy whores in the astral realm, okay? They're filthy and disgusting. And I know people are going to be like, oh, what is she talking about? Whenever you're suppressing yourself and you're totally selfless as an ego, then you're filthy and disgusting as an astral body when you leave the body. So this is when you go to sleep every night, and eventually as you go to, as you die, when you die, you go to heaven, or whatever you want to call it, you become united with that part of you that that was unconscious or you weren't in touch with. Like, for example, the men in the experiment where they, what is it? The men in the experiment, when they were judging the, you know, being homophobic and judging the gay men, you know, so that was a part of them that they were judging, right? And so maybe throughout their lifetime, they judged, you know, maybe a friend came out to them and they ostracized them. Or maybe they are like the head of a company or something like that, and they put in policies that were discriminate towards gay men. Or, you know, they may have done something small, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter, but when you're judging someone, and that's a part of you, and you meet that part of you and you die, and you were unaware of it, you start to become judged for it. And they purposely do this and hide things from the ego. That's the way it's set up, to condition the ego to judge itself so they can actually collect the loosh or the negative energy that it provides when the soul is illuminated, okay? So and I want to just focus on that. I want to focus on, not only do you go through a period of where, you know, your sexual nature is perverted and you get a lot of these sexual, you know, thoughts, and you know, your mind is kind of like, you know, constantly on that, annoyingly so. But you start to, especially as you start to get into your more etheric realms, right? You're ascending to your upper chakras, which is your God self. You become more empathic. And when you're becoming more empathic, you're getting the energy of other souls. And so, you know, it represents this empathic energy that you're taking on as yourself, right? And I talk a little bit about this in my last video that I did on meditation and how, as you're an empath, you absorb other people's feelings as if they're your own. And so, you know, their souls or solar plexuses are also become attached to you. And so I used to, you know, walk around and I would pick up other people's sexual energy, and it would make me feel dirty and nasty. Okay, and so this is taking on the sins of the world as an empath. And so I explained this a little bit more in my last video. If you want to know a little bit more about what an empath is and the condition of being an empath, you know, please look at my video on meditation. But, you know, I want to do a part 2 to this. And in my part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit more about, you know, what the Kundalini represents, right? In relation not just to the Bible, but to astrology. And looking at the Gospel of Judas and Ophiuchus, right? The constellation of Ophiuchus, and also the symbology of the medical caduceus, okay? So, you know, I'm going to just end the video right now, and I will see you in my part 2.